The Psalms are as practical and relevant as any other part of the Bible. They are poetry, yes, but they are songs that are meant to teach us, shape us, and form us. They give us the wisdom and instruction that we need to live a life with God according to His ways. Psalm 15, a psalm of David. O Lord, who shall sojourn in your tent? Who shall dwell on your holy hill? He who walks blamelessly and does what is right and speaks truth in his heart, who does not slander with his tongue and does no evil to his neighbor, nor takes up a reproach against his friend, in whose eyes a vile person is despised, but who honors those who fear the Lord, who swears to his own hurt and does not change, who does not put out his money at interest, and does not take a bribe against the innocent. He who does these things shall never be moved. Psalm 15 opens with a question, but it's a different kind of question than the one found in, say, Psalm 13, where David cried out, "How long, O Lord?" Here the question comes not from a place of suffering, but from a posture of learning. O Lord, who shall sojourn in your tent? Who shall dwell on your holy hill? David supplies the answer in the next verse, but before we go further, there's a few interesting things to notice about the question, or rather the pair of questions. There are some key words here, like tent, dwell, and holy hill, that connect it to other psalms like 2, 3, 5, and 24, as well as with other parts of the Bible. To sojourn means to journey, and along with the word tent, it evokes the wilderness wanderings of Israel, where God's presence dwelt in the tabernacle or the tent of meeting. But the second part moves from traveling to the solidity of dwelling on the holy hill or mountain, which brings to mind Jerusalem, the temple, and Zion, all symbols of God's holy presence among His people. A holy mountain also brings us back to the Garden of Eden, where human beings lived with an uninterrupted, unhindered experience of God's presence. So taken together, these two questions are about the covenants, the sacrifices, the purity of God's people. Who is the ideal worshiper of the Lord? Or to put it another way, who can live near God? How can sinful, selfish people be in the presence of a holy God at all times? Notice that David's desire isn't simply to worship. He wants to travel with God and live with God. He wants a path with God and a place with God, which is to say that he wants to be nearer, closer, deeper in a personal relationship, enjoying the sort of communion that Adam and Eve had in the garden. Therefore, verse 1 isn't simply a religious question for Jewish rituals of tabernacles and temples. It's the core question for all of humanity. God, how can I be close to you? How can we have the sort of intimacy with you for which all of our hearts are longing as human beings? In verses 2 through 5, we hear the answer to David's question, and it can all be summed up in the first line. Who can be close to God? Well, it's he who walks blamelessly and does what is right and speaks truth in his heart. Those three general statements with the verbs walk, do, and speak cover the whole ethical spectrum, the way that we live, the way that we act, and the way that we speak. Blameless is the Hebrew word tamim, and it means someone or something who is whole, full of integrity, without blemish. It's used in the Bible to describe people like Noah and Abraham, and it's also used in the story of Passover and the laws of the Torah to specify what kind of sacrifices Israel was to offer, such as a spotless lamb. So here we learn that the entry requirement for an intimate relationship with God is a pure and true heart that does what is right. The verses that come afterward illustrate and offer some examples of what this kind of blameless life looks like. In their words and their speech, The blameless person doesn't slander or speak in bitter curses against either their neighbor or their friends. Think of Psalm 12 here. In their relationships, the blameless person doesn't align with a vile person, someone who has rejected God and his ways, but rather they honor and respect those who love and serve the Lord because they admire the same things. In their promises, the blameless person keeps their word even when it hurts, because their integrity is at stake. In their financial dealings, the blameless person wasn't to take advantage of others by collecting interest or accepting bribes, both of which were forbidden in the law. When we take all of these qualities together, we find out that the answer to the question, who can dwell with God, doesn't have a ritual or a ceremonial answer like we might expect if we've read the law of Moses. It's not offer this sacrifice or wash 7 times. Rather, David gives an ethical answer that points to the heart. It's all about one's inner character that leads to outward obedience to God. There's another important element of these qualities of a blameless person, and it's that they focus on the social dimension. In other words, the examples that David offers of a blameless life are aimed at relationships, community, justice, and the welfare of others. Don't slander your neighbor, but rather speak the truth. Honor those who fear the Lord, keep your promises, and so on. David could have said, the one who can be close to God is the person who retreats from the world to live an ascetic life of meditation and inner development. But he doesn't say that. Now, times of retreat, solitude, and quiet reflection are, of course, good and healthy practices in our relationship with God, and other Psalms teach us how to do that. But I think David focuses on these communal aspects of righteousness because they are the natural demonstration of inner purity. A blameless heart will flow out toward others in blameless actions and words. David is describing how we love God by loving our neighbors. And of course, this psalm isn't exhaustive. Like, these are the boxes you must check to be blameless. We must remember that the Psalms are public prayers and songs. So what is the effect of a community singing this song? Hopefully, it wouldn't result in hypocrisy or pride, like, look at how blameless we are. Rather, praying and singing Psalm 15 has 2 main effects. It forces us to confront our flaws, and it shapes our desires so that we would long to have these qualities in our hearts. It reminds us that on our own, we will never be the kind of people who can enter God's presence. So it leads us to cry out for mercy. This is a song for those who are not blameless, to nurture in us a humble posture of prayer. Lord, renew us, remake us, the whole community, in your blameless image. Psalm 15 ends with a promise. He who does these things shall never be moved. In Psalm 10, this was the boast of the arrogant, wicked person. I shall not be moved. In Psalm 13, David pleads for help because he is shaken, unstable, and defeated. But the promise of Psalm 15 is that the person who obeys God's words and follows his ways will not be shaken, meaning they are in the presence of God and protected by his favor. Even when things go wrong, the blameless person is grounded and secure in the steadfast love of the Lord. But again, this brings us back to the haunting realization that we are not blameless. As the previous psalm taught us in the most blunt way, no one is qualified to dwell in the presence of the holy God. We have all turned aside to our own ways, except for one. When we read Psalm 15 in light of Jesus and his gospel, we come to see that this psalm does teach us about how to live a blameless life, but it also points beyond us to the only one who is truly blameless. Jesus said that only God is righteous. And of course, he also said that he is God and a human being, without flaw or sin of any kind, perfect in all his actions, saying exactly what was necessary and no more, treating sinners and sufferers with mercy and justice, teaching about how to love God and love your neighbor as yourself. We were created for God's presence, but human beings were removed from the intimacy that we enjoyed in the garden because of our insistence that we want to define what is right and wrong. We want to say what is blameless and what is evil. And when the Word became flesh and dwelt with us, bringing God's presence near, we killed him. He died as a criminal, blamed, but still blameless. And yet, Jesus cannot be moved. When he rose from the dead and ascended to the throne, he promised that all who believe in him and trust in his sacrifice for our sins can enter God's presence, not through our own righteousness, but through his. One day, when Jesus returns, we will dwell with God forever, and he will dwell with us, and we will never be moved away from his presence ever again. Let's consider a few times in which we could pray Psalm 15 together. When you want to be near God, and you want to ask him how it can be done, how you can be closer to him. When you go camping in a tent or hiking on a mountain, remembering the holy tent and the holy mountain where God's presence used to dwell. When you recognize evil or hypocrisy in your heart, realizing that you are not as blameless as you think you are. When you want to learn how to use your words to bless and speak the truth rather than to curse and to lie. When you don't want to associate with people who celebrate what is vile, disgusting, and contrary to God's ways. When you have a choice between breaking a promise or keeping it, even if it costs you. When you need to examine your financial transactions and ask, am I doing what is just here? When you're offered a bribe, maybe a subtle gift to manipulate you, and you need to decide whether to accept it. When you long to be a person of integrity, character, and righteousness. When you want your church or community to love each other well by doing right by each other. When you are moved or shaken from a place of stability and you want God to keep you steady. When you realize that you cannot be blameless on your own, and you need the righteousness of Jesus to forgive your sins and to give you eternal life. Psalm 15, a psalm of David. O Lord, who shall sojourn in your tent? Who shall dwell on your holy hill? He who walks blamelessly and does what is right and speaks truth in his heart, who does not slander with his tongue and does no evil to his neighbor, nor takes up a reproach against his friend, in whose eyes a vile person is despised, but who honors those who fear the Lord, who swears to his own hurt and does not change, who does not put out his money at interest, and does not take a bribe against the innocent. He who does these things shall never be moved. Thank you for listening to the Woven Psalms. This podcast is a ministry of Rock Hill Community Church in Duluth, Minnesota. I'm Mike Solis. I'm a pastor at Rock Hill and the writer of this podcast. Ethan Gibbs is our producer, editor, and composer of the theme music. Our logo was designed by Bo Walsh. This podcast uses the English Standard Version, published by Crossway. We want to give a special thanks to Poor Bishop Hooper for allowing us to use the music from their Every Psalm project. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please share it with others. You can learn more about our work at wovenpsalms.com.